Ever feel like everyone else got a memo about power and communication that you missed? Like, how come some voices seem to matter more than others?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
today we are ripping open that memo, and trust me, you'll want to read this one because we're going deep into the world of political economy and communication.
And it's not as dry as it sounds. You've got a whole stack of sources there just waiting to be explored.
Yeah, these sources are going to help us connect those big, sometimes kind of intimidating power dynamics to like your everyday life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, those power dynamics, they shape everything.
They really do. Okay, so first things first. For those who missed that memo, what exactly is political economy of communication?
It's a mouthful, that's for sure. Well, imagine this. A group of friends gather around a campfire,
Right.
and they're sharing stories.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Now, think about who's doing most of the talking. Who decides which stories are worth telling? And who's just listening? Political economy of communication is like shining a light on those dynamics, but on a much bigger scale.
So it's like who has the power in the conversation?
Exactly. It's about understanding the power structures that shape how we create, share, and even just consume information, especially, in a capitalist system like ours.
Okay, so it's about more than just the message itself. It's about who has the power to even deliver the message in the first place.
Absolutely. And, one of your sources, Vincent Moscow, he hits the nail on the head when he talks about how those power relations influence, well, everything.
They do.
From what makes the news to how these algorithms decide what you see online, even what's cool to say on social media.
It's like that saying, history is written by the victors. Whoever wins, they get to control the narrative.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And those narratives, those stories, they become part of our culture, our shared understanding of how the world works.
So it's not just about talking, it's about the whole process of like sending a message, someone on the other end receiving it, and then them filtering that message through their own lens, right?
Yeah.
Their own life experiences and such.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that lens, a lot of it's shaped by culture. Like, think about a simple thumbs up emoji.
Okay.
Here in the West, it's usually a good thing, right? Positive. But in some Middle Eastern cultures, it can be super offensive. Same symbol, totally different meanings based on, well, cultural context.
It's amazing how much those unspoken rules come into play. To illustrate this whole clash of interpretations, you've got some pretty fascinating examples in the sources, like contrasting views on what it even means to be a journalist. We're talking CCTV in China versus, say, Sky News in the UK. So what's the main difference there in how they see their jobs?
Well, it boils down to this, what's considered the journalist's primary responsibility. You see, in these sources, the Chinese journalists, they often prioritize, like, nation building, maintaining social harmony.
So less about holding the powerful accountable like we see a lot of in Western journalism and more about like presenting a united front.
That's one way to look at it. It's about promoting a shared national identity, a shared purpose. Of course, it's a big generalization. And your source material even mentions this story about a student who pitched a piece to CCTV, their English language channel.
Oh, right. And this wasn't even some propaganda piece about how great the regime is. It was about robotics.
Exactly.
And they ran with it.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? If maybe that assumption that everything coming out of CCTV is like directly from the Communist Party, maybe that needs a second look.
For sure. It's like they always say, it's never black and white, always shades of gray.
Precisely. And exploring those nuances, that's what political economy of communication is all about. But to really get into these different approaches to journalism, we need to talk about a big idea, ideology.
Yes, ideology. That word gets thrown around a lot these days, but the sources you pulled, especially those lecture notes, they go beyond just like your political stance. They connect it to this whole base and superstructure thing from Karl Marx. Want to break that down for us?
Sure. Imagine society is like a building, okay?
Okay, I like it. A
The
building.
base, that's the foundation.
Yeah.
That's the economic system, how stuff gets made, the relationship between, say, workers and owners. The superstructure, well, that's everything else built on top of that foundation. Culture, our institutions, political systems, even our ideas.
So the base shapes the superstructure. Like how we make a living influences our beliefs, our values, even what we consider good art.
Exactly. It's not always that simple, but you get the idea. Think about, like, the printing press. That was a game changer.
Huge.
Totally revolutionized how we share knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Led to higher literacy rates, new ideas, even the Protestant Reformation. That's the base influencing the superstructure in action.
Wow, yeah, that's a good example. So where does ideology fit into all of this?
Ideology.
Yeah.
Ideology is like the air we breathe. It's the dominant worldview of a society, and this is key, often unconscious beliefs and assumptions that shape how we see the world, our place in it.
So we don't even realize it's there, but it's influencing how we think about pretty much everything.
You got it. And, your sources use a really powerful example to illustrate this. Slave owners in the American South. Many of them were deeply religious, talked about liberty and equality, yet they were also propping up a system that denied those very things to millions of people. Talk about a disconnect.
It's wild, right? But that's what you're talking about with ideology. It can create this cognitive dissonance where people hold these totally opposite beliefs but still think they're in the right.
Nailed it. It's like seeing what you want to see. Your brain just edits out the stuff that doesn't fit your worldview.
Oh, absolutely. And that brings us to another big idea from this stack of sources: hegemony.
Hegemony. Such a loaded word.
It is. And it's about power, right? But
Yeah.
it's not as simple as one person or group just forcing their will on others.
You're so right. It's way more nuanced than that. Hegemony, the way this Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci described it, it's more about getting people to consent to the dominant worldview, often without them realizing that's even happening.
It's kind of insidious when you think about it. Like, instead of trying to silence you, they make it seem like, I don't know, unnecessary to even disagree. Or like uncool even.
You got it. And your sources actually have this perfect example of this. The Sex Pistols signing with EMI back in '77.
Wait, the Sex Pistols, like the punk band that was basically the definition of anti-establishment, they signed with a major label.
They did. Which is kind of wild, right? Here's this band. Their whole identity was about challenging the status quo, like literally sticking it to the man. And then, boom, they signed with, well, the corporate music industry.
So are they still rebelling, or did they become like the very thing they were raging against?
That is the question. And it's something we're still grappling with today, right? Like, think about all the debate around social media.
Oh, for sure. Are these platforms really these bastions of free expression, or are they just really, really good at making us feel like we're being rebellious while they're raking in cash?
It makes you think, right?
Hmm.
And that leads perfectly into this idea of commodification. We usually think of it in terms of like stuff, actual products. But political economy says, nope, it's way bigger than that.
Okay, so how can things that aren't even like tangible, how can those be commodified?
Think about your own experience with, say, social media. Facebook, they're not selling you a physical product, right?
Yeah.
But they are collecting a ton of information about you.
Yeah.
Your interests, your habits, probably even know what you're going to have for dinner tonight.
Oh, they definitely know I've been eyeing those fuzzy slippers and those late night targeted ads. It's scary accurate.
Exactly. But that data, your data, it's valuable. Facebook, they package it up, sell it to advertisers who are then going to use it to target you with those fuzzy slipper ads.
So I'm actually the product.
In a way, yeah, it's your attention, your data that's being bought and sold. Which
Yeah.
begs the question, is that a fair exchange for a free service? Or is it a more subtle form of, well, exploitation?
Makes you think. And this kind of goes back to those contrasting values in journalism we were talking about, doesn't it? Like CCTV, they're all about this idea of nation building as a core value. But how different is that from, say, the BBC promoting British national identity, especially during big events?
Oh, absolutely. The lines get blurry. Remember all that coverage from the last royal wedding, the charades, the fancy hats.
They ate it up.
Yeah.
And it's not like the BBC was out there challenging anyone to rethink what it means to be British, were they? If anything, those events, they're kind of designed to like stir up those patriotic feelings.
Right. It's a really good point. And that's what makes this whole political economy thing so fascinating. It's not about like right and wrong answers. It's about asking those deeper questions. Like, whose interests are really being served here? And how do those interests shape the information, the stories that we encounter every single day?
It's about connecting the dots. And speaking of connecting the dots, our deep dive, it takes us to one final thought-provoking point. The sources you pulled, they brought up those diversity reports that a lot of these big tech companies put out. The ones that break down like how many people from different genders and racial backgrounds work there.
Yeah, those reports, they're everywhere these days. And you know what's interesting?
Not that.
They highlight this really interesting omission. See, those reports, they focus a lot on gender and race, which are obviously super important. But there's another biggie that often gets overlooked: social class.
That's true. You almost never see data on how many employees come from like working class families or how many were the first in their family to go to college. It's like that whole part of someone's background is just invisible.
Exactly. And you know what they say? Sometimes what's left unsaid speaks volumes.
Totally.
It's like, remember that whole discussion we had about ideology?
Hmm.
Sometimes the most revealing clues about these power dynamics, they're hidden in plain sight.
It's like a magic trick. They distract you with one hand while they're doing the real work with the other. So the question is, why aren't these tech companies, especially the ones always going on about diversity and inclusion, why aren't they addressing this glaring omission in their fancy reports? What's the real story there? What are they trying to not say by not saying it?
It's the million-dollar question, and it
Hmm.
loops us right back to that fundamental question in political economy. Whose interests are being served here? Is it possible that even in these systems that, on the surface they say they're based on merit, but is it possible that the very definition of merit is, well, it's already rigged in favor of those who already have a head start?
It's a lot to chew on, right? But that's the beauty of a good deep dive, wouldn't you say? You come away with these incredible new insights into how power, culture, and even communication, how all of it intersects to shape how we see the world around us.
Absolutely. And this is really just scratching the surface. Political economy, it's a huge field. It's always
Yeah.
evolving. But the more you engage with these ideas,
Yeah.
the more you question, the better equipped you'll be to, well, navigate this crazy media-saturated wars we live in.
You got to be savvy.
Exactly.
So, to our listeners, keep asking those tough questions, keep digging, and most importantly, keep exploring. It's a journey worth taking. Until next time, happy diving.